Arthur Harding was a man who had it all. Money clung to him like a second skin. From a young age, he had possessed a Midas touch, turning every venture into gold. His name was whispered in reverence in the hallowed halls of Wall Street. Arthur was a titan of industry, a captain of commerce, a name synonymous with success. He had built an empire from the ground up, his company a testament to his unwavering ambition. His penthouse apartment, a palace in the sky, offered breathtaking views of the city he had conquered. Arthur was accustomed to the finer things in life: tailored suits, exotic vacations, and the company of the elite. He dined with politicians and celebrities, his every word scrutinized and analyzed. His life was a whirlwind of board meetings, charity galas, and private jets. Yet, behind the polished facade, Arthur harbored a secret sorrow, a void that even his immense wealth couldn't fill. Arthur had learned that success could be a double-edged sword. It attracted envy and resentment, making genuine connections difficult. He had been burned before, his trust betrayed by those seeking to exploit his fortune. Over the years, he had erected walls around his heart, protecting himself from further pain. He became a master of disguise, his true emotions hidden beneath a veneer of aloofness. He craved authenticity, a connection that transcended the superficiality of his world. But the higher he climbed the ladder of success, the more isolated he became. The city that once held so much promise now felt like a gilded cage, trapping him in his solitary existence. He yearned for something more, a love that had eluded his grasp, a love that he feared was lost forever. The weight of his loneliness was a heavy cloak, smothering him even amidst the opulence of his surroundings. His penthouse, for all its grandeur, felt more like a mausoleum, each room echoing with the ghosts of his past. The silence was deafening, broken only by the ticking of his grandfather clock, a constant reminder of time's relentless march. Nights were the hardest. Arthur would often find himself drawn to the balcony, a glass of scotch warming his hand as he gazed out at the glittering cityscape. The city that never slept seemed to mock his insomnia, its vibrant energy a stark contrast to the emptiness he felt within. He longed for someone to share the view with, someone to chase away the shadows that haunted his thoughts. He tried to fill the void with fleeting distractions. He threw lavish parties, the champagne flowing freely as he played the role of the charming host. He surrounded himself with beautiful people, their laughter and conversation a poor substitute for genuine connection. He dated sophisticated women, their elegance and intelligence failing to ignite the spark he so desperately craved. Arthur knew that his wealth set him apart. People treated him differently, their motives often suspect. He yearned for someone to see past his fortune, to appreciate him for the man he was beneath the polished facade. He longed for a love that was pure and unconditional, a love that had eluded him for far too long. He longed for the love he had known, the love that had been ripped away from him so many years ago. He was haunted by the memory of her laughter, the way her eyes sparkled with mischief and intelligence. They had met in their youth, two souls yearning for something more than the ordinary. She was the only one who had ever truly seen him, who had loved him for his heart and not his wealth. Their love had been a whirlwind of stolen kisses, whispered secrets, and shared dreams. They had vowed to spend their lives together, their love a beacon of hope in an often cruel world. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. A cruel twist of fate had robbed him of his soulmate, leaving him with nothing but memories and a heart filled with an almost unbearable ache. 23 years had passed, but the pain of her loss was still raw, a wound that refused to heal. He had tried to move on, to bury himself in his work, but the memory of her love lingered, a bittersweet torment. He visited her grave every year, the inscription on the headstone a constant reminder of his loss. "Beloved Emily, forever in my heart," it read, the words etched into the cold stone like a physical manifestation of his grief. He would sit there for hours, lost in his memories, the scent of lilies, her favorite flower, filling the air around him. He told her about his life, his successes and failures, knowing that she was the only one who would have truly understood. He confessed his loneliness, his fear that he would never find a love like theirs again. And in the silence of the cemetery, surrounded by the ghosts of the past, Arthur found a strange sort of solace. It was a bittersweet comfort, a reminder that even in death, their love endured. But the encounter he was about to have would shake him to his core, forcing him to confront the past in ways he could never have imagined. Arthur's chauffeured limousine glided through the city streets, a cocoon of luxury shielding him from the outside world. The cityscape blurred into a kaleidoscope of colors, the cacophony of horns and sirens, a distant hum within the confines of his mobile sanctuary. He was on his way to yet another business meeting, his mind already calculating profit margins and strategic alliances. As the limousine slowed at a red light, Arthur's gaze drifted towards the sidewalk, and that's when he saw her. A woman, her ragged clothes a stark contrast to the polished facades surrounding her, sat huddled on the pavement. Her hair was unkempt, her face etched with the harsh realities of life on the streets. She held out a trembling hand, her eyes pleading for spare change. Arthur's first instinct was to look away. He was a man of business, not charity. He had his own problems to deal with, his own demons to battle. But there was something about the woman's eyes that held his gaze. They were a piercing blue, like the ocean after a storm, a mixture of pain and resilience. For a fleeting moment, he thought he saw a flicker of familiarity in those eyes, a spark that ignited a long-dormant memory. He rolled down the window, the noise of the city flooding into the limousine's quiet interior. The woman looked up, startled, her hand instinctively retreating to her side. She had probably been ignored countless times that day, her pleas for help falling on deaf ears. Arthur saw a flicker of hope in her eyes, quickly replaced by resignation, as she realized he was probably just another indifferent stranger. He stared at her, his breath catching in his throat. The woman's eyes, those piercing blue eyes, held a depth of sadness that mirrored his own. It was as if he was looking into a reflection of his own lost soul. The years of hardship etched upon her face a stark reminder of the fragility of life. But it was more than that. There was a haunting familiarity in her features, a ghost of someone he once knew. He couldn't place it. This nagging sense of recognition. Was it a trick of the light? A cruel joke played by his subconscious? He searched her face, looking for an answer, a clue to unravel the mystery of her gaze. The woman, sensing his scrutiny, lowered her eyes, her fingers nervously twisting a worn button on her threadbare coat. The limousine idled, impatient to rejoin the flow of traffic. Arthur's driver, oblivious to the internal turmoil gripping his employer, cleared his throat, a subtle reminder of their schedule. But Arthur was lost in a sea of memories. The woman's face a flickering beacon in the fog of his past. He had to know, had to understand the strange pull he felt towards this woman. "Wait," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the roar of the city. The words seemed to hang in the air, a fragile thread connecting him to the woman on the street corner. He rolled the window down further, the sounds of the city flooding the luxurious interior of the limousine, a jarring contrast to the silence of his thoughts. He had to know her story. The woman, startled by his unexpected command, looked up, her eyes widening in surprise. She had seen his kind before, their expensive suits and aloof demeanor a clear indication of their social standing. They would stare at her with a mixture of pity and disdain, their tightly pursed lips a clear message, "Don't bother me with your problems." But there was something different about this man. His eyes, usually cold and calculating, held a flicker of something else, something akin to recognition, to, dare she hope, compassion? He leaned forward, his gaze intense, as if trying to unravel a deep-seated mystery. She felt a shiver run down her spine, a primal instinct warning her to flee. Arthur, battling his own internal demons, saw the flicker of fear in her eyes, and instantly regretted his forwardness. He had spent so long shielded by wealth and privilege that he had forgotten how to interact with those less fortunate, how to simply be human. He took a deep breath, willing his racing heart to slow, and forced a smile to his lips, hoping to convey a sense of warmth rather than intimidation. "I'm sorry," he began, his voice a soothing baritone in the cacophony of the city. "I didn't mean to frighten you. It's just, you look familiar. Have we met before?" He knew the question was absurd, a desperate attempt to bridge the chasm that separated their worlds. But he couldn't shake the feeling that their paths had crossed before, perhaps in another life, another time. Memories flooded back, unbidden and bittersweet. Emily, her laughter, like wind chimes dancing in a summer breeze. Her eyes, a kaleidoscope of blues and greens that shifted with her moods. They had met at the local library, both drawn to the dusty shelves and the promise of adventure held within the pages of countless books. He, a scholarship student from the wrong side of the tracks, determined to make something of himself. She, the daughter of a wealthy industrialist, yearning for a love that transcended social boundaries. Their love had been a whirlwind of stolen moments and shared dreams. They would meet at their secret spot by the river, the rushing water a symphony to their whispered promises. He would bring her wildflowers, their delicate beauty a stark contrast to the gritty reality of their surroundings. She would read to him, her voice a soothing balm to his soul. For a brief, shining moment, he had allowed himself to believe that their love could conquer all obstacles. That one day, he would make something of himself, prove to her father that he was worthy of his daughter's hand. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. He remembered the day she told him about the illness, her voice barely a whisper as she described the relentless fatigue, the unexplained bruises. He remembered the fear that had gripped his heart, the desperate hope that it was all a terrible mistake. He remembered the countless hours spent by her bedside, holding her hand, whispering words of love and encouragement, praying for a miracle. And then, the day that shattered his world. The doctor's somber expression, the gentle hand on his shoulder, the words that echoed the death knell of his dreams. We did everything we could. He had raged, he had cried, he had begged for a second chance. But Emily was gone, taken too soon by a cruel twist of fate. He had made a promise to her that day, standing in the pouring rain, his tears mingling with the downpour. He would never forget her, would carry her memory in his heart until his dying breath. He would honor her memory by living a life filled with purpose, by making something of himself, by never giving up on their shared dreams. And he had for a time. He had poured all his grief, all his energy into his work, driven by a single-minded determination to succeed. He had climbed the corporate ladder, rung by rung, his ambition fueled by a potent cocktail of ambition and heartbreak. He had amassed his fortune brick by brick, a monument to a love that had been lost too soon. But somewhere along the way, he had lost himself. The man who had once dreamed of sharing his success with the woman he loved had become a prisoner of his own making. He had built walls around his heart, his wealth a shield against the pain of the past. He had forgotten the importance of human connection, the simple beauty of a shared smile, a kind word, a helping hand. And now, staring into the eyes of this woman, this stranger who seemed to hold a piece of his past, he felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps it was time to tear down the walls, to let go of the guilt and the pain, to honor Emily's memory by embracing life once more. Perhaps this encounter, this chance meeting on a crowded city street, was fate's way of offering him a second chance. The following day, Arthur found himself drawn back to the familiar serenity of the cemetery. The weight of his encounter with the beggar woman, her haunting eyes a mirror to his own buried grief, had stirred something deep within him. He craved the solace of Emily's presence, the silent comfort of her memory. He instructed his driver to wait at the gate, craving the solitude of this pilgrimage. The crunch of gravel beneath his polished shoes echoed through the quiet lanes, each step heavy with the weight of his unspoken emotions. The air was thick with the scent of lilies, Emily's favorite, a bittersweet reminder of her enduring presence. The cemetery, a tapestry of time-worn stone and vibrant greenery, held an almost sacred silence. He passed by weathered headstones, each one a testament to a life lived, a story etched in granite and marble. Some were adorned with fresh flowers, tokens of love and remembrance from those left behind. Others stood forgotten, their inscriptions faded by time and neglect. He found himself drawn to Emily's grave as if guided by an invisible thread. The familiar inscription on the headstone, "Beloved Emily, forever in my heart," seemed to pulse with a life of its own, a beacon in the sea of stone. He knelt before her grave, the cool marble a stark contrast to the warmth of his grief. He squinted, trying to make out the figure through the interplay of light and shadow. Arthur's breath hitched in his throat, his mind refusing to believe the evidence of his own eyes. It couldn't be. It was impossible. And yet there she stood, as if conjured from his darkest dreams. The beggar woman, her ragged clothes, her unkempt hair, her face etched with the hardships of life on the streets, were unmistakable. Her eyes, usually clouded with a veil of sadness, now burned with an intense light, a mixture of recognition and something else. Arthur stared back, his mind reeling, his carefully constructed world tilting precariously on its axis. He wanted to speak, to demand an explanation, to unravel the mystery that stood before him. But words failed him, trapped in the prison of his astonishment. The woman took a hesitant step towards him, then another, her eyes never leaving his. The silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken questions, with the weight of years gone by. "You," he croaked, his voice hoarse with emotion. "What are you doing here?" The woman met his gaze, her expression unreadable. A flicker of pain crossed her face, quickly masked by a stoic resolve. Arthur watched her, his mind racing, trying to make sense of the impossible. The air hung heavy with unspoken truths, the silence punctuated only by the chirping of birds and the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. In her hands, she held a small object, something wrapped in a faded blue ribbon. You gave me this," she whispered, her voice raspy, as if unused for days. He cautiously took the package, his fingers brushing against hers. Inside, nestled in layers of tissue paper, lay a small silver locket. He recognized it instantly. "Emily," he breathed, his voice barely a whisper. He opened the locket, his fingers tracing the engraved initials, E and A. The resemblance was undeniable. The same bone structure, the same piercing blue eyes, the same hint of mischief lurking beneath the surface. "It's me, Arthur," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "It's Sarah. You're Sarah." Arthur's mind reeled. Sarah, Emily's younger sister. He had lost track of Sarah after the funeral. Emily's parents, consumed by their own grief, had moved away, taking Sarah with them. "But how?" Arthur stammered, his voice choked with emotion. Sarah closed her eyes, tears tracing silvery paths down her cheeks. "It's a long story, Arthur," she whispered. She took a deep breath, as if steeling herself to relive a painful past. After Emily died," she began, her voice faltering, "everything changed. My parents, they couldn't bear to look at me. I reminded them too much of her, of their loss. They sent me away," she continued, her voice laced with bitterness. "To boarding schools, to relatives I barely knew. I kept this," she said, holding up the silver locket. "It was all I had left of her, of you, of the happy times we shared." "I hit hard times, Arthur," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Life hasn't been kind. I ended up on the streets, lost and alone. But I never forgot Emily. I never forgot you. I saw you that day in the limousine," she continued. "I recognized you instantly, but I was afraid." Arthur looked at her, his heart breaking for her pain, for the years they had lost. "I'm so sorry, Sarah," he whispered. "You're not alone anymore." Arthur led Sarah gently away from Emily's grave, their hands intertwined, their steps slow and deliberate. As they walked, Sarah shared fragments of her story, each piece a heartbreaking testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Arthur listened intently, his heart aching for the pain she had endured, the love she had lost. As they reached the gates of the cemetery, the limousine waiting patiently in the fading light, Arthur made a decision. He would not let Sarah slip away again. He would honor Emily's memory by embracing the present, by offering Sarah the love and support she deserved. "Come with me," he said, his voice filled with a newfound conviction. "Let me help you. Let me be your family now." Sarah looked at him, her eyes searching his face, searching for any hint of judgment, of pity. But all she saw was compassion. "Just say yes," Arthur said, his gaze unwavering. "Say yes to a new beginning." And as they stepped into the waiting limousine, Arthur knew that this was not the end of their story. It was in many ways just the beginning.